In this project, we are going to try to recreate one of our favorite album covers from one of our favorite singers or bands. And the first thing you want to do always is research your subject. So I've done a little research and I've selected 5 album covers from musicians and artists that I follow and listen to. And I want to look at them individually and consider, based on what I know of color theory, which one will work best for my needs. I've got one that's very strong contrast between darks and lights. There's another one that is mostly gray tones, and again, strong contrast with darks and lights. Here's one in color. But I am going to be working on a square album, and I'm not sure if all of this gray empty area out here is something that I want to recreate. This one here, again, strong contrast with black and white, and that big bold red background that might come up real nicely with black Sharpie and just a red marker. This one here is a combination of a lot of different things, and there is a lot of color, but not as strong contrast as I saw in some of the earlier album covers. So my next job is to consider what they're going to look like if I print them. So I've printed out a couple of selections. I've decided to go with this image of Billie Holiday. I could very easily recreate this album cover as seen here in this black and white image using my ebony pencil. But I'm actually thinking I might want to add some color to this and also add some red for the lips and maybe some color here or in her dress, and leave the rest of it in gray tones. So again, I'm making some decisions that are going to tweak the album cover to my needs. So now that I've decided on this, I'm going to select the section of album cover that is 6 inches by 6 inches. Now this particular one just happens to have this line right at the 6-inch point, and that's perfect for me. The other thing I want to consider is the fact that my paper, my illustration board, is 9 inches by 9. So here's where we're going to have to do a little bit of math, and the math that I worked out is this. I have a 9 by 9 illustration board. If I create a 1/2 inch frame all the way around, then I can use a 1-inch grid and measure that very easily. My image here is 6 by 6, so I will be enlarging this image up to my 9 by 9 illustration board. So with a 6-inch image, what that translates into a 1-inch grid is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to create a grid over my image that is 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. And then I will measure my illustration board. I'll take that 1/2 inch first, that'll be my frame, and then the rest will be measured in 1-inch increments. So let me show you exactly what I did on the other side. First thing I'm going to do is measure off that 1/2 inch, and then I will measure 1 inch all the way along the edge of my illustration board. You want these markings to be as accurate as possible, and then there's that 1/2 inch on the end. Do that along the entire perimeter of your illustration board. Mark off that 1/2 inch, and then every 1 inch. Mark it off. Just a little dot or a dash, and again, make sure it's very accurate. If any of these measurements are off by more than a hair, it'll throw your whole piece off. So the 1/2 inch followed by the inch all the way, whoops, all the way around. And once you have those marks in place, then you're ready to connect the dots, so to speak, and connect the first 2 markings and draw a line all the way across. Pair up the next 2 marks and draw a line all the way across. And continue doing this. Again, make sure that ruler is measured perfectly, lined up perfectly, so that you get straight lines that are completely parallel to the other lines. Don't draw too heavily. Draw your lines lightly so that you can erase any lines that you need to erase. And once you have those lines done, then you're going to turn your paper again and connect the other marks and draw the perpendicular lines to create your grid. And now I'm ready to create the grid over my image that I've printed out. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure where my 6 inches is. And draw those lines in there. And again, measure the 6 inches here. This one naturally has that line right there. And the same thing over here. Measure out that 1 inch or that 6 inch marking. And then using my ruler, lining it up along that edge, mark every 3/4 of an inch. Remember, we're going to be enlarging this image onto the illustration board. This grid will be smaller than the grid on the illustration board. So now that I have those markings in place, again, I'm going to take my pencil, connect those marks, and draw that line across. This time I may need to draw more heavily so that I can see my lines, especially through these dark values. Again, make sure that they line up perfectly so that your grid will exactly match up with the larger grid on your good paper. Now that I've created my 1 inch grid on my good copy paper and my 3/4 inch grid on my image, I'm ready to label these pieces. Now that I've created my 1 inch grid on my illustration board and my 3/4 inch grid on my image, I'm ready to label the spaces to help me as I recreate this image on the good copy paper. So across the top, you want to put A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. And then coming down, you want to number it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then do the same here, just very lightly. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Remember, we are leaving that blank because that is our part of our 1/2 inch border all the way around. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And now we're ready to begin. What you want to do with this is look to see what is in grid A1. Not much of anything. I can actually go like this and know that that's going to be shaded in. There is just a little touch of her hair there, and I can draw that in there if I want. It's just very slight. Now I'm going to look at B1 and what's in that square. And if I look very closely at the square itself, I can break that down again, just cut it in half vertically and horizontally, and I can see the light hitting the top edge of her hair right there in that upper square. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to start creating that drawn image as I see it. And that comes down and goes over and connects with that little bit of hair that I drew in A1. I know that all of this, again, is going to be black. So I'm just going to shade that in like that just to get me started. I'm going to move on to C1 and see what I have there. And now we see a little bit more of that highlight in the hair from whatever light is on Billy's face and the top of her head. And this continues kind of in a wave across just that top edge. I'm actually kind of lower here than I need to be. And maybe just a little bit too far that way. So I'm just going to erase that and redraw that. Get that highlight in there and this little bit there. And then move on to D1. And this section here, her hair is coming down towards her forehead. And again, if I draw another vertical line and a horizontal line to divide this square in half, vertically and horizontally, I can see that her forehead starts right in that lower section, right about there, and slopes down almost to the corner where D and E meet, but not quite. So I'm going to put a little dot there and then just draw that arch of her forehead. And the forehead continues back over this way and fizzles out into C1 just a little bit. So basically what I am doing is I am looking at each grid, each little square, and only looking at what's in that square and drawing that here in its corresponding square, so that by the time I am done, I will have recreated this album cover exactly the way it appears here.